For those that I haven't met, I'm Sheila Berry Oliver. I'm the immediate past president of BPW Florida and the program chair. And it is the program committee that has helped put together all of the virtual webinars that we've produced this year. There have been a total of 10, I believe. So some of them have been in conjunction with other organizations, like the League of Women Voters has put on 2 of those, but the rest have been through either BPW members or BPW associates. I guess I will say people who have a connection with BPW. For those who don't know BPW, since not everybody is a BPW member, BPW is Business and Professional Women, and we are BPW Florida. We were founded in 1919, and we have a half a dozen local organizations around the state, ranging from the Keys to the Palm Beach area on the East Coast and to the Tampa Bay area on the West Coast. We have a number of programming efforts which are virtual. And if you go to our website, which is bpwfl.org, you can view any of our past webinars that have been recorded. We also have an annual conference, which this year it's in Palm Beach Gardens, and that'll be held on June 20th through 22nd. And if you go to bpwfl.org on the homepage, you'll find a link to a page that will give you both a schedule of what's going to happen as well as registration information. So with that, I would like to introduce Carolyn Salvador, who is an expert in the nonprofit organizations and how they operate efficiently and effectively. And she's going to speak to us today about sustaining revenue. Carolyn?
Yep. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's nice to see some of you that are on camera. I am a BPW member of the Upper Keys, and I'm going to screen share with you, and I'll kind of kick things off and give you a little bit of background about who I am and why I'm here chatting with you. But we are going to really just talk about where we are in this crazy world right now. It's gotten a little better today. I think the market was nice to us today, but I'm talking about fundraising in this really uncertain time. So as Sheila mentioned, I am Carolyn Salvador. I am the founder of Momentum One. We are a fundraising consultancy, and I work with small and emerging nonprofits. A little bit about my background. I actually went to high school and college in Florida. I live part-time in Key Largo, and I'm part-time in Atlanta, which is where I'm chatting with you now from. But I've had 25 years of nonprofit leadership, with about 15 of those years being a CEO or executive director, helping to grow smaller nonprofits and turning them into medium-sized nonprofits. Prior to that, and if anyone's been in nonprofit long enough, you might not have started out that way. I did not. I started out in corporate world, and for those Floridians, I actually worked at Burdines, was kind of my first 7-8 years of my life working at Burdines as a buyer, and then moved into owning some of my own businesses. I have a picture of my family. I think maybe we can see that up here. So this is my family. Been married to my husband for a very long time, met him at University of Florida. I have 2 adult children and a really crazy dog that did not make the picture. So just a bit about Momentum One, working with small and emerging nonprofits. I partner with a firm in New York called Hudson Ferris. And so that helps me give capacity to larger nonprofits. We've got research teams and really working to grow and diversify revenues. So I know we mentioned that we're going to be doing questions maybe via chat, but also I'm going to leave some time at the end for you all to be able to kind of ask questions, because I do like these to be a little bit of a dialogue versus a monologue, but know that you're muted. So we're going to talk about really today's climate, which is super uncertain. The great news from yesterday, the announcement with the potential tariff, tariff changes from China, which is, I think, sparked the market rally today, taking tariffs from the 145% to 30%, and also U.S. goods tariff from China being reduced down to 10%. We still have market volatility. It's going to continue. If you haven't look today. It's actually a good day to look, but the market's rallied back, even putting us into kind of a positive positive numbers for the year, which is wonderful considering where we were sitting in March. I was like an ostrich and did not look at my retirement accounts for a while. All of these things, this talk of tariffs, really has this question about looming inflation and the cost of goods that can dramatically increase, which has an impact on our nonprofits, on our communities, on the people that we serve. There's also talk about recession. Now, I have done this presentation a couple times over the past couple weeks. Every day I go in and I look to see what the experts are saying, and I've revised it so many times. It started out at 65% chance of recession, and thankfully we're down to around 30%. I'd love it to be zero or like really low, but we're going in the right direction. Still creating uncertainty for our organizations, for funding, and for our donors. The job market is a little squirrely, and the nonprofit job market has seen a huge drop in jobs since inauguration, with the human service jobs dropping over 2,000. Now I'll take a pause. This is a nonpartisan. This is a nonpartisan presentation. I am just stating facts. So depending upon where you are, I'm just talking facts here. We don't have to look any further to kind of look at the headlines to see how nonprofits are being impacted or potentially impacted by what's happening. Even just today, Chan Zuckerberg reported that they're killing funding for any nonprofits associated with DE&I. Couple days ago, there was an article just about how the fair housing assistance was going to be federal funds were going to be cut, impacting South Florida residents. Probably heard a week or so ago about federal funding cutting, the media. So public broadcasting and NPR funding was cut for them. Thankfully, on a positive note, Head Start, actually, there was a reversal of proposed funding cuts for them. So a lot of children and families, I think, are breathing a sigh of relief. But even more, I just picked some out of there, with South Florida gun violence prevention organizations. There's nonprofit funding impacting them. And AmeriCorps, there's a whole swath of cancellation of those grants that are going out there. So what do we know about the proposed budget cuts? Well, first of all, let me say there's no clear way of tracking the impact of this in real time. It's changing. And right now there's a proposed budget cuts. The president has put forth his budget. We know that discretionary spending cuts in his budget has a reduction of about 163 billion, which are all those agencies that then the feds, the funding comes down through those agencies into our state funding. The Congress has it. They have really until the 30th to finalize. They'll debate, they will revise and put forth a revised budget to the president. Supposedly he has 10 days to sign it. Now we all hear about, that we're in gridlock and, we're going to be shut down. We have till October 1st for the new budgetary year. So I would be surprised if the president signs and reconciles that within 10 days. But again, we just really we don't know, which leads to even more uncertainty about our landscape. So the president's skinny budget, if you will, his budget has a lot of deep cuts proposed in there, which impact a lot of agencies that support nonprofits. I'm not going to go through and read all of this, and I'll share the PowerPoint for sure, but you can see fair housing is 60 million cut, heating assistance for low-income households, community service block grants, AmeriCorps, it kind of goes on, some of which FEMA is an interesting cut, certainly for Florida, 644 million or 46 million. So this is what right now is in his budget. I did a quick research poll and looked at kind of what does federal funding look like in Florida by department. And the pie looks pretty big, certainly for Health and Human Services at 28.5 billion, all the way down to Department of Labor, which gets, still not a small number, 0.8 billion. We're not talking B's, not M's here. So a lot of money that comes to Florida from the federal government. Doing some research, these departments disperse anywhere from 2 to 50% of their funding to nonprofits in Florida. That's just for federal funding, not counting any state money that may come through. 2% for Department of Transportation, up to 50% of their funding budget in HHS that gets dispersed throughout the agencies in Florida to help the communities. So we know that there's a shakeup. in addition to kind of what's happening in our economy and the potential for freezes and then budget cuts to nonprofit, there's also been a shift in this administration from certain priorities and, DE&I, climate, public health, immigration support, international aid, all have, for this administration, not been a focus and shifting landscape, which for a lot of nonprofits that work in that sector is really sending shockwaves to them. There's going to be a refocus of the federal priorities. We don't really know exactly what those are, but workforce development programs, things that, this administration cares about, we will start to see funding shift into them. So that's kind of the backdrop of what's happening. Then from the donor side of things, we actually have some other things kind of working maybe not in nonprofit favor, which is this decline of the number of individual donors. There's actually been a little bit of increase in total dollar donations, but I'm talking about the number of individual donors that contribute to nonprofits. And that's really been caused by the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. It's hard for me to get that out. And that essentially doubled the amount of standard deduction. That happened in 2008, but there was a really dramatic shift of individuals and households that were itemizing their deductions. It went from 30% down to 10%. So people were less incentivized to actually make charitable distributions. Now, that act is set to expire this December. So, to be determined what happens. There's been some advocacy work behind the scenes to, keep that high standard deduction, which will help a lot of families, but then also to potentially add a tax credit for charitable donations outside of that deduction. So, we shall see. What we know for all of this with the shifting landscape is it's going to have an impact on the programs and the services that are really important to our community. Some programs are going to shut down because, let's face it, if you're funded 50% by federal funds and that goes away, there's not a lot of strategies that's going to help replace that. So that's going to impact people in our communities one way or the other. It might impact those still, people that you're serving in your charity or that you care about or sitting on a board. There's also been an interesting narrative that's out there that I just really, really don't like. And it's this narrative about the misuse of nonprofits using funds appropriately. And this impacts donor confidence and it can impact people giving to nonprofits. So I'm going to talk in a few minutes just about a few strategies to combat that. But that's been a narrative. In fact, I was actually at a dinner party and someone was like made reference. I don't think they knew what I did. And they're like, well, all those big bloated nonprofits with their big executive director salaries. And I kind of looked at them like, oh, really? Like, I don't really think nonprofit, people get into nonprofits to make a lot of money. There's, a lot of easier ways to make money than to go into nonprofits. But again, there's a narrative that's out there. So with all of this, foundations are being called to step up and to fill some of the gaps. Now, they're never going to fill that giant gap of federal funding. But with that, there's potentially going to be an increase for foundation dollars. And there's going to be foundations that are going to be shifting away from some priorities that the administration doesn't necessarily focus on because they don't want to be aligned with them. So, having said all of that, we're not helpless out here. I used to run a nonprofit that was a business advocacy organization working with early education. And so I was a lobbyist in my past life for about 8 or 9 years. So maybe this is coming from our roots, but we're not helpless. And we have legislators at both the state and, the our US senators and representatives. If you don't know who your representatives are, find out and reach out to them. Like you have the power of your voice. You can talk to them, but go to the ones that you can elect. I say this because I've been in situations where we meet with a legislator and they really want to know who their constituents are, who their voters are. That's where you get their attention. If you bring people that vote for them to a meeting and you talk about the issues that you care about, their ears perk up a lot more than if it's just a group of concerned citizens from the state of Florida. So that's really important. And share stories when you go, share stories that impact, present data, leave behind something, because face it, our legislators they're not experts in the work that you do. So we have to educate them and tell them why it's important and give them a call to action. The other piece I would say that is strategic is that look at the committees that they're on, because yes, they might vote on a bill if it gets to a floor and they're able to vote, but where they work and their committee assignments are really important. And they also listen when we write a check to committee to reelect. So I say that as a strategy, but all of that behind the scenes, we have a voice in this. So I'll kind of take one more look at, kind of what could happen, and then I'm going to move on to some discussion about what we can also do. So we talked about the recession, what that could do potentially to donor confidence, to actually discretionary spending, and to giving. Well, we can't really look at 2020 to 2022 because even though that was deemed a recession, giving actually rose during that time because a lot of people I think were home. We had actually the stock market rebounded a little bit and we were feeling good and wanting to help. So we can't look at that, but we can look back at 2008, and I remember that really specifically. But the market value dropped in that year by 50%. But what's super interesting is donations to nonprofits did not drop like that. They dropped 7% in 2008 and then rebounded a little bit in 2009. So, and that's on average. And what we learned from that is like that's on average of people that did a lot to mitigate it and people that didn't do anything. So, good fundraising and great fundraising actions help to change and mitigate those risks. So, your role as fundraisers, as board members, as active community participants, helping support nonprofits in fundraising, it's more important than ever. But doing nothing and kind of putting your head in the sand is absolutely not a great strategy. So I say adopt a really agile mindset. This is important for everything we do, but certainly in fundraising it is. I have worked with directors of development that are like, I have a plan. I'm going to march to the death on this plan, even though all the indicators were that their plan wasn't working. And what happened? They missed the plan. So, don't be so black and white in the approach to fundraising that you're not nimble enough. And if anything, what's happened as we look at some nonprofits that are shuttering their doors because they relied really heavily on federal funding, the old adage, don't put all your eggs in one basket, is super important right now. So, diversifying revenue is kind of the key for long term sustainability. We do know that foundations are going to step up. So, looking at how you're working against that in your organizations is really vitally important, and start creating strategies to double down on that. Now, getting foundation grants, whether it's institutional funder or it's a corporate foundation, that's a little bit longer road. That's not short term dollars, but really start putting in plans in place to really look at that and then be able to try to obtain a little bit more funding. Our current donors are also another source for having kind of this agile mindset, because it is so much easier and less expensive for organizations to keep your existing donors than to acquire new donors. So make sure that you're looking at and evaluating your current strategies for engaging donors and retaining them. It's really important, because turnover right now, I think the average donor retention rate's somewhere around 55%. So conversely, on average, organizations lose about 45%. Well, what if you could shift that to keeping your donor retention rate to 65 or 70%? That really helps create sustaining revenue. What we know right now with potential inflation, cost of goods going up, is that we should really kind of at a macro level reduce our expectation for smaller donors, because smaller donors with smaller pocketbooks, as I say, are going to be more impacted as a percentage of their family spending and will have less to give. On the opposite side of that, we have our donors that are philanthropic and have been supporting organizations at a higher level and have maybe created a donor advised fund. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but lean into that. Find out who your donor advised fund donors are, and also look at moving toward creating language on websites for planned giving. That is what can really be transformative for organizations. But certainly being flexible is really, really important for all organizations to kind of thrive right now. So let's talk about the putting all your eggs in one basket. How do you know? How do you know if you're on a board? How do you know if you're a leader? There's just some quick. You don't have to, have a data analysis background. You can just do some really quick, review of looking at and evaluating what I'll call your revenue buckets or your revenue categories. Know your total dollars coming from individual donors, corporate supporters, foundations, events, government funding. Look at it. Look at that percent to total. You're going to want to see if there's overweighted segments. The same thing holds true for looking at your total amount of individual donations. You can break them out into donors by dollar category, smaller donors, major donors. Are you oversaturated by a few large donors that are making up your whole category? And I just spoke with an organization today, and I think probably 90% of their funding was coming from two donors. Well, that creates a really big risk for that organization if one, those donors aren't stewarded properly, they pass away, if they decide that you are not aligned with their values anymore. So again, that really helps you understand where you're at, and then you can start deploying strategies to diversify. This is from Giving USA. This was a 2023 look back of all the kind of categories of charity giving. Individual donors still account for the lion's share of a nonprofit's funding. So 67%, followed by foundations, bequests. So that's our planned giving. That's continuing to edge up because we have a real transformation of wealth moving from baby boomers and to their heirs and then to charities. Corporate giving, bequests are even more than corporate giving. So if that kind of gives you some background. I was surprised they didn't incorporate federal dollars into this, but so this is kind of looking at non-federal campaigns, but kind of seeing what the bucket looks like. So here's some positive news. I know I've been talking about, hey, the sky's falling, donors are going back, we don't have this uncertainty. But in a recent survey, I believe this was Candid that, put out there, like asking individual donors, are you going to continue to give? And 79% of them said, I'm going to give the same or more in 2025. So that's good news. Now they ask kind of why do you give? And it's really the number one driving factor is to meet it's the specific needs of that charity, followed by their personal financial situation, which dovetails into our conversation about the economy. So what do you do to be able to try to capture those donors, to be able to keep your donors? First is really understanding kind of why they give. And donors give emotionally. Giving away your money is really not a rational thing. It's emotional. And so it's followed by logic, though. So the number one reason people give is because they were asked. They were asked. So a lot of, I think, nonprofits are worried about, well, I just, had this really robust end of year giving. I don't want to ask again. You have to ask. You have to ask. They're not going to just give it to you. You may get a few, but you need to ask. So don't be afraid. When you ask, you have to really use that emotional storytelling that connects your mission to the work you do, personalize it. You talk about the impact of a person and that transformational arc of how the work you did, and because of the donors, they were transformed. But there's so much more work to be done. There's so much more. So that one person is an indication of greater need and the work that you do. So emotional storytelling is super important. The other piece is that it's great. You create this wonderful narrative, but people give because they want to know that their gifts are going to make an impact. So what I call this, and case for support or social math, you need to be able to articulate to donors what their gift is going to do. Now, I'm not saying restrict money. We like unrestricted funds, but you can add language to your website, to an appeal, to just when you're talking and socializing. A gift of $100 will do things like buy books for, two children to go to school, supply 5 meals for, a family for the month, whatever it is, your case for support. So start to kind of think about how do you talk about the work you do and link a dollar gift with an impact because people want to know concretely. They don't want to hear, hey, just give to us, because then that's not really emotionally. Remember, it's followed by logic. So we want to make an impact. The other thing is that, we've got to find our donors. A lot of people think about, well, I'm just going to ask everyone. And maybe that's, you might get a few, but people give because what you do is aligned to what they care about. You may have the best organization in the world or, volunteer or serve on a board for this wonderful organization. And maybe it rescues, animals. But I may like animals, but if I really care about early education or I care about workforce development or moving people and breaking generational poverty, I'm not your person. Like you need to find your people and you need to be able to understand that and then, find them and align your values to them. Those are your people, those are your tribe. The last thing I'll say is about understanding kind of when they give, and it goes back to that false narrative, is that they want to trust that you're going to be a good steward of the money. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, one, you can report back to donors about the impact of what their gifts are doing in just simple letters. They don't have to be super fancy, but also doing what I call frictionless fundraising on a website, which is adding your 990 to your website, showing them, creating, going and doing the extra step to get that candid seal, of your platinum seal of transparency. There's some other seals, good nonprofits, and things that you can do to just add that other social proof to help donors bring them through so they feel good about giving to you. So let's talk about donor retention strategies. As I mentioned earlier, it's easier to keep our donors and we want to keep them. Some easy things that don't cost a lot of money and don't take a lot of time. Thanking our donors and promptly thanking them. Now, hopefully, if you're in an organization, you're going to send an automated thank you and tell them thank you so much. Really appreciate your gift. Maybe here's some things the money's going to do. Emails are great. But let's say that you had someone give you a first time gift or you had someone give you a gift of significance. And I say major donors, that can mean a lot of different things to different organizations. It could be a $5,000 gift, $10,000 gift. For your organization, if you're small, it could be $1,000 gift. But if you have someone making a gift of significance to you, picking up the phone and calling them is far better. And there's a lot of statistics that say, like, if you thank someone by phone, like their gift goes up over the year, their lifetime value for you goes up. So doing it in an expedient way. Now, this is a great place if you're like, ugh, I've got no time. But board members love to do this because it's not asking for money, it's thanking people. So I always advocate doing kind of a thankathon for donors, but putting a couple board members on them, giving a very short script about, how do they call and what do they say. Most of the time, I don't know if you're like me, you get a number on your phone, you don't know them, you kick them to voicemail. So you're going to get voicemail. And so what a nice voicemail to get, hi, this is Carolyn, thank you so much for your gift. It's really transformative for our organization. If you have a few minutes, I'd love to share with you the work, but we just really thank you so much for what you're doing. Click, it's done. Sometimes you'll get people. I was the CEO for a charity that we raised funds to support pediatric heart transplant research. And I did some of the thank yous myself, and I got grandma and grandpa. And that was wonderful because they gave me an earful. It was their child, their grandchild that had a heart transplant. It was wonderful, but I learned all about them. Why? And believe me, I put it in my database. I knew this was grandparent, right? And so I talk to them differently going forward. So it's a great opportunity to learn more about your donors. It's a great opportunity to say thank you and to engage, your board, not just the team. So I mentioned earlier, but just again, a way that you're telling them that you're being transparent with the money is to let them know at least quarterly. It doesn't have to be a fancy, wonderful brochure that you're sending them. It can be a simple email formatted with, thought you'd like to know, the impact of your gift. Here's some programs, a picture of children or whatever it is that you do. Put it in there and let them know. Low workload, but just sending it out. If you have a bigger team, if you have the ability, then it's great to segment our donors by kind of the work that you do. Maybe you know that this person was really, really concerned about cleaning up our, our oceans and our beaches, and they were, really focused on that aspect of our work. Then maybe in that update that you give them, you show them and demonstrate some of the work you're doing against that. If you don't have time, you give them the overall, here's what we're doing. If you can, if it was like a grandparent, like for me in that instance, I'm going to talk about some of the really great work that we're doing to improve quality of life for children that had a heart transplant. The other piece of donor retention is that, if you have those mid-level donors and major donors, absolutely try to schedule some calls if you can do it quarterly and just talk to them. And there's some scripts that you can do, but it's just really, you're not asking for money. You're thanking them and you're inquiring about, I'd love to hear what aspect of our work, resonates with you, why you decide to support us. And then you share with them a little bit, about what you're doing. These are just great touch points. Another easy breezy thing that we can do is we all don't go far without these, and we've got video on our camera. It doesn't have to be, like primetime TV video. You can like take yourself, hey, this is Carolyn, wanted to share with you something really exciting today. Send it in a text, send it, in an email. So those are some simple things to really dramatically improve donor retention. This is a grid. I know it's probably hard to see. And so again, I'm going to share this, but it's what I call kind of a stewardship matrix. And so it talks about, for first time donors, when we acknowledge them, how do we do it? How do we do recognition? How do we do reporting to donors? And it kind of breaks it down by different donor segments, whether it's first time, reoccurring, major donors. But it's a template for you to use if you don't have one. If you don't have one, you look at this and go, oh my goodness, I can't do all of this. I would absolutely advocate for putting something on paper and then really enforcing it, because at the end of the year, there's nothing worse than like you got a gift and you didn't talk to them until you're asking them for money again. Like the chance of them saying yes to that is pretty low. So this just goes into that kind of executing a donor stewardship plan that you can manage for your size and scope of your organization. The other piece I will just touch on before we kind of talk about foundations is, well, two more things, is creating a monthly giving strategy. This is like we're all used to subscription models. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm always shocked to see when I look at my bank statement, I forget that I'm like, like why am I subscribing to this thing? I thought I canceled that. Like we're all used to Netflix and all of our monthly. Well, getting monthly donors creates just this amazing stream of revenue for our organization. And reoccurring donors are worth so much more, like 540% than a one-time donor. So creating these monthly giving programs for your organization is really important. And the retention rate, look at this, 90 versus 50. So it really begs to create a strategy for your organization to be able to do this monthly sustaining. So here's just a couple tips I'll kind of go through that can get you started. And it's, think about like the work you do, and maybe, branding is everything, right? We all want to be part of something that has a cool name. So create a name for this monthly giving program that you do. And then, again, like remember that they are your lifeblood. We want to grow them. So ask, and this, a lot of people don't think about this, it's kind of counterintuitive. If someone comes into your organization, they're a first time giver, within 90 days, follow up. While it's still fresh in their mind that they donated to you, that you ask them to lean in and become a monthly donor. If you've got a database and you want to kind of look through and go, well, who do I even ask within my donor base? One, you want to start with, first of all, you want to start with your existing donors. You don't want to go out and be like, hey, you never gave, can you become a monthly donor? It's not to say you don't want to put that on your landing page, but start looking inward and look at the donors that you have. look at people that maybe they're not on this monthly giving program, but they've given to you year over year, or maybe they've given to you a couple times in this year. So identify those people that are more highly engaged. Maybe they open your emails a lot or they comment on your social media post. Volunteers are a really good place, to look at. 70% of volunteers on average, I know some are higher and lower, donate to the organizations they actually volunteer at. So they're kind of prime for reoccurring gifts. And then going back to the language I said before was just develop your case for support for each gift size. So a monthly gift of $10 or X amount per year can do this. Um, Incorporate the monthly giving option on all your donation pages and all your appeals. So give people that option right from the get-go to become monthly donors. Sometimes it makes that larger gift a little bit easier because they have, they can take bite-sized chunks out of it on a monthly. And then, there's a strategy to actually kind of give social proof. Well, most people give at, and you point it like if it's $50 a month, that helps me. Like, I'm like, do I give 10? Do I give 75? Well, most people are 50. Okay, well, maybe I'll go up to 50. So it's a little psychology behind that. Ask them in different ways. You can start a campaign on social media, on your Facebook. One of the interesting things is a lot of people do like a challenge match. So you might think about the summer fall campaign where you start a monthly donor circle. You go to a couple of your major donors who support and ask them for challenge funds. And so it could be, we're going to match monthly gifts up to $5,000, $10,000. People love matching gifts because it gets to leverage their dollars, and they want to become part of this really, this circle. So the other thing I will end with before we kind of get into donor advised funds is that if you know who your donor advised fund donors are, interestingly, you can remind them about this option to give monthly because they've already put the money in to a donor advised fund. So don't want to assume, but I'm going to talk about donor advised funds. I'll just give you kind of nuts and bolts. If you're unfamiliar with a donor advised fund, or DAF, as we call them, is basically a fund that is managed either by your traditional Fidelities or Charles Schwab's, or it could be led by your community foundations, or there's like a Christian DAF fund or some other private organizations. And a DAF is a vehicle for philanthropic people to put money into a DAF. Almost think of it like kind of like a mutual fund, but it's managed. So you put money in, and immediately as a donor, when you put money and fund your DAF, it's in my name, so I fund my own DAF managed by Charles Schwab. I get the tax deduction that year. It goes into the DAF, and then the money sits there until I decide what charities I want it distributed to. So it's interesting because right now there's over 2 million DAFs with $250 billion that are sitting in there. They have to go to charity, but right now there's no federal regulation that says they have to be dispersed to charity. So understanding that is really important because that money will eventually go to charities and to nonprofits. So how do you even kind of get a piece of the pie? Well, the first thing is to add language to your donation page. We gladly accept donations from DAFs, and then you give them who to contact. So that's just like a no-brainer to put it out there. But non-cash gifts. So I don't mean them giving you a car or something else. These are gifts of stocks, qualified charitable distributions. That's another way that nonprofits are really seeing a significant increase in donations. Non-cash gifts have a much higher rate of the level of gift than a cash gift. Because think about it, it's sitting in our stocks, it's not affecting my day-to-day spending. So if I've got some appreciated stocks or, well, I don't know if they're so appreciated today, but hopefully, or crypto. I mean, that crypto is like funny money for people. Like they don't even think of that sometimes as money, but asking for gifts and putting language that you will accept non-cash gifts or gifts of stock or qualified charitable distributions dramatically increases the potential for revenue for your organizations. And there's a giant transfer of wealth. So baby boomers have acquired a lot of assets. A lot of baby boomers have this wonderful thing still called a pension. So jealous. You know, bought houses at a really low amount. There's been a giant, increase in house values, certainly in Florida. And so they have a lot of assets. So giving from assets versus giving from cash is another way that your organizations can really start to look to create sustaining revenue. So I don't know who's on the phone in terms of board members or for that you're maybe you're organized in a nonprofit, you're leading a nonprofit or working in a nonprofit, but this is something you can take back to your board or you take back to your networks. Board members' role in fundraising is really, really important. It's not that we expect board members to actually ask for money, but you have to open your networks. And that's really important. It's creating that ripple effect. Board members have a fiduciary responsibility to the organizations. And so the way to do that is to leverage your networks. So if you're sitting out there thinking, well, how can I help? First, you need to be able to understand how you talk about the work that's being done. So I would say, go back to the organization and make sure you've got kind of your talking points, that you have your 2-minute elevator pitch. But then it's really looking at your networks and trying to make a couple introductions to the leadership of a nonprofit on a monthly basis, even if a quarterly, like that's the role, is to be able to leverage your networks. Maybe you just do an introduction on an email, or you attend a lunch and you invite someone to sit, and then you let the executive director or the development director do the work. You're providing it. You don't have to ask for money if you're a board member. If you like to do that, that's fantastic. We can have a separate conversation on that. Maybe it's that you want to host a little event at your house where you have a small little gathering of people, and you give the organization, you tell your why of volunteering, and then you give the organization leadership time to talk. Maybe you bring in someone that's been impacted by the work. And it's just a way to be able to create awareness for the work that they do, and potentially fundraise. There's structures to these things, or you could organize it virtually. Could be a Zoom, and you could get a Zoom for the people that you work with to share a little bit about the organization. The other piece, and I'll just kind of leave it, is that with boards and certainly when foundations out, they ask how much, what percentage of your board is contributing. So it's really important that boards, are engaged and that it's a meaningful gift for you. It doesn't have to be that meaningful gift for me is going to look a lot different than the meaningful gift for someone else that's sitting on a board. So I just kind of share that as board's role. So talked about individual giving, talked about a couple different strategies. Kind of the last thing I'm going to kind of share with you is, how do we kind of start talking to foundations? Because we know foundations are going to lean in. And so how do we create these sustaining diversified revenues with foundations? So there's a couple different types. We've got family foundations, or say private foundations. There's the big kind of institutional givers, right? There's the Chan Zuckerberg, the all the big ones that we kind of know at our state level or national. And then there's corporations that have standalone foundations. It could be Wellstar, it could be Truist Foundation. So they're sitting alongside of a company, and trying to look to be able to lean in to support communities. Foundations are really just like others, where it's all about building relationships. Fundraising, really, I don't even like to call it fundraising, because it really should be called development, because it's about developing relationships and moving away from the thought process of making things transactional, and again, building relationships. So with foundations, it's important to be able to try to find the foundation leadership, and then be able to actually reach out to them and schedule a time to talk to them and talk about the potential for alignment. Foundations have their priorities. Now, there's some that don't, but a lot of them have priorities, and there are requests for proposals that are out there. I will say that don't just go out, hire a grant writer, or spend lots of time writing grants when you haven't had a conversation to find out if you're aligned. That is really, truly, a very low ROI activity for you. But you can get invitations to foundations that have closed RFPs. That's really by doing outreach. You can do it via LinkedIn, find out who's on their board, and try to get a call to talk about what they care about, and then share what you do and see if they're aligned. Organizations, foundations are really looking for charities to kind of complement the work that they do. There are their investments in the community, not necessarily replace it. So, like I have, I'll give you the example. Like, let's say that I'm working in workforce development, I'm a foundation, I really care about this. Well, maybe there's a foundation that's really targeting a certain community, or they're doing things that are maybe helping in STEM and STEAM workforce development. And that's something I don't have in my portfolio. So I will look for foundations that might do that work to be able to complement the existing piece of my workforce development portfolio. But if I've got great relationships with nonprofits, I'm not going to kick someone out and bring someone else in. So tips to be more successful, don't spray and pray. So just submitting unsolicited grant proposals are really, not gonna provide a great return on the investment. And alignment is, really important. You can go to the foundation directory and research. It's a great database to research funding priorities. You can look to see where they fund because they might be aligned, but they might only fund in Wisconsin. That's not going to really help you. So we want to know that. So and reach out and have that preliminary meeting. So that's super important. So here is my information. So it's Carolyn at Hudson Ferris if you would like to reach out to me. And here's just kind of we work and do a lot of different things. So this is kind of just a short list of kind of the work that we do. And I would love to hear from you. And if there's any questions, if that's okay, Sheila, we can open it up to see if because I'm tired of hearing my own voice, but I'd love to see if there's any questions
Okay,
that we can maybe answer.
What I'm going to suggest, Caroline, is that people put their questions in the chat so that if there are overlapping questions, I can combine them and ask you what those questions.
Okay.
But let me start off with one for you. You mentioned something, a candid seal. What is that?
So there's a seal of transparency. And so you go onto the Candid website. And let me see if I can pull it up. You go onto Candid website and you register your nonprofit. And when you register your nonprofit, it's GuideStar. It's called GuideStar now. It was actually called Sophia GuideStar. And you create an account and you update your nonprofit's profile. And then by doing that profile, that's important because there are going to be, sorry, I'm my hand up for some weird reason. On your profile, they're going to ask for certain things. As you go through the exercise of updating your profile, the more that you input, it will change your seal. So if you haven't answered all the questions, you might not get a seal of transparency. But if you've uploaded your 990s, if you put in your board thing, you put in statements. So you have to go through the exercise. It's going to take a little bit of time. You might have to come back to it, but create the account, keep going through, and then they'll be like, hey, congratulations. You are now, you're qualified for a gold seal or a platinum seal of transparency. And then they'll actually send you the seal, and then you put the seal on your website.
Okay. While I'm waiting for other people to put some questions in, I'm curious about a phone call versus a handwritten thank you. I know for me, I found it very impactful when I have received a handwritten thank you for making a donation, and it was done by a board member. And that was actually, once I received it, I brought it back to a nonprofit that I was a board member of to suggest that we do that.
I think that's great. I don't think it's necessarily an either or. I think it's a personal touch point. But there have been, so I would write the letter, I would write the handwritten letter. You can kind of draw the line in the sand of like how you can manage that for your organization in terms of like, do we say we're going to write it for gifts of a certain level, or do we actually only do that for first time donors, whatever that is. So I see a note and I'll address that. But I would absolutely do a handwritten one for some of your higher level donors. But picking up the phone in addition to that handwritten letter, like how special would you feel when that happens? So that's really, really important to think. Don't dismiss the phone call. Don't dismiss it. You can segment your donors to be, okay, who receives an email? So maybe it's your donations lower than kind of your threshold, of $500 or $1,000. So you have to look at it and understand the donations specific to you. At minimum, everyone should just get an email, but then you could follow it up with a handwritten and then follow it up with a phone call. And so I use kind of the things where maybe it's a first time donor that you're really making them feel special, and you might pick up the phone or you might do the handwritten, or it's someone that signed up for that monthly donation. Maybe that's a handwritten or a phone call or both. So I would absolutely do that. And so I would like kind of look at it, or a major gift, or maybe someone's bumped up their gift. And that's all of a sudden you're like, wow, they're really getting more engaged with us. So I think that's another way to kind of look at it. It's your time constraints, your team, but also leveraging the board to be involved in this. You're not going to go wrong by doing too much.
And I only gave two options. Someone asked about emailing versus texting as other options.
I wouldn't say texting as a way of stewardship. I think it's additive if you have a close relationship with someone, but I do think, and so if you have a text to give, if you have a text to give platform where you're actually texting donors, and then there's they're doing it via their mobile device, and then there's an automated back, thank you so much via text. Great, but they should go into then your funnel of creating a thank you for them that's followed up via email at a minimum. And then you can segment them by the level of giving.
Okay. Could you say a little bit more? Somebody asked about corporate donation programs that are common or even uncommon.
Can you expand on that question so I understand what you might?
Why don't you expand on it?
Go.
Oh, I can't hear you.
I'm now unmuted. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the presentation, Carolyn. Corporate donation programs, similar to, I've heard of matching programs, for example, when you can go to a corporate and match any donation that comes from the staff. I've heard of some programs that give time off paid for volunteer work to certain nonprofits. And those are just a few of the ones I've heard. Are you familiar with other?
Yeah, so let me show you kind of real quick. I'll pop this in. There is a tool called Double the Donation. Let me find it or put it in here. Tell me if you can see it. So doublethedonation.com. So doublethedonation.com is actually a plugin that you put in on your website, and it will you put it by your donation page, and it will say, hey, you belong to XYZ, check here to see if your company matches. It will also scan your database for anyone that has an email that's a corporate email, and then there's an automation that can occur to actually let them know if that their company does match. They still have to fill out paperwork, so it's not going to do all the work for them. So it's also, another way. And to your point, some companies will match volunteer dollars with actual donations to it. So Double the Donation actually covers a lot of those things. But in terms of other programs, corporations donate all the time to charities. It might look different. It might look like a corporate sponsorship, right? It might be a sponsorship for an event, which I think we all kind of can understand. It might be a naming, corporations do it for different reasons. It aligns with their corporate social responsibility. So aligns with what they're caring about, which aligns with their brand, They will do it to get visibility among their potential customers because they want to align their brand with something their customers care about. So corporations will support an organization maybe if they get naming rights, or they get to do something that, again, their name is in front of their customers, or if their product or services can be positioned in front of their customers or potential customers. Those are all important levers, but there's a lot of ways that you can create opportunities that align with a corporation. So let's say that have a program and you are doing something in workforce development. Well, banks, by the way, love everything to do with workforce development, right? They, really kind of jump in on that. So maybe you create a scholarship program that is Truist Scholarship or SunTrust Scholarship, or it's a naming idea. And then with that, there's recognition on your website or shout outs in social. Or so there's a lot of kind of ways that you can lean in and look at the programs that you do and how they may overlap with their corporate social responsibility. Another, and I'm getting off track, but you could even be, if you're, let's say that aligns, maybe that what you're doing could be really interesting to the employees of a company. Maybe you are, I would work with a group called, their name's Solo Parent, and so they help single parents raise healthy children. So they had solo parent groups that were virtual groups, and so they became kind of a subject matter expert. So think about like what you have expertise in. So they were working with Coca-Cola bottlers, and Coca-Cola bottlers implemented their single parent programs at their location. Coca-Cola bottlers actually paid them to be able to have this program there. And then they went in and did some like lunch and learns on some, kind of things that can help single parents, and had dialogue with them. So they actually presented during that time. So that's kind of an example of that. For corporate foundations, then they have specific alignments that are separate and standalone, kind of treat them as a foundation, but they are an offshoot of that. A lot of times companies the dollars will either come from corporate social responsibility or marketing budget.
Somebody asked about whether or not social media platforms are useful for gaining exposure for your nonprofit or foundation.
Yes, 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 yes. So 100% they are. If you're looking for B2B, business to business, then LinkedIn is a great place to be. And so think about the platforms on who's there. So it's very different, and people consume social media differently. I have a big presence on LinkedIn. Just, I post, a couple times a week. And I, even as a nonprofit leader, I would post on there kind of talking about it, or present corporate corporate opportunities on LinkedIn, or talk about kind of the work that we're doing. I also used Twitter or X when I was the head of a research organization, because a lot of medical professionals were on there. So I was kind of talking about the work we were doing, and that was exposure. I use Facebook if I was really kind of talking to my potential donors, and I would I would look at Facebook groups that maybe, and be able to join Facebook groups that talk to my constituents. So, for BPW, I would find, other women's groups there, and maybe, represent, and you're not just pitching yourself, but you're just talking and positioning yourself as a thought leader in those groups. So that's kind of another way. So your content on social media needs to not it needs to be varied. And I always kind of say, like, think about, like, you can do like mission Mondays on Facebook, where you kind of talk about the work you do. And then you can use Wednesdays to, story tell. And so you're talking about the impact of someone that's been helped by the transformation of someone that's helped there. And then maybe on Thursdays you do kind of shout out, where you talk about either a partner or a corporate sponsor, or you kind of talk about other things. Like a shout out could be where you're calling out to, like, talk about an event that you have. So you're varying it, where you're, again, informing, you're emotionally storytelling, and then you're either highlighting someone else, another organization, a partner, or you're inviting people to support the organization via event, or ask for a gift. So those are ways to kind of structure the social media, but different audiences on the different media. Instagram, is almost a feed for TikTok at this point, right? We all look at it as a very quick, videos are key on Instagram. So, if you have video rich content, then it's a great platform for you. And Facebook or Meta, I'm so old school, call it Facebook, but Meta and Instagram feed each other. So not hard to repurpose your content on there.
One last question for you, Carolyn. I think there are some differing opinions on this, and I've seen organizations approach it differently. Are galas worth all the effort that the volunteers and the staff have to put into it to raise money?
The answer is it depends. It 100% depends. You have to, your events are fundraisers. They're fundraisers. So you have to look at it and run it like a business and what your profit margin is. I had, and I'm not saying you're bragging, but I had gala and it was a bourbon gala. So, people, so it was high incentive for people to go, but I ran it at a 75% profit margin and I netted over $1 million. Was it worth it? Oh, heck yeah, it was worth it. $1 million, how would I make that money up? And it brought in a lot of new donors into my funnel. So a lot of people for me to talk about. So it served many purposes. I work with organizations that have a golf tournament or have a golf tournament. Let's just talk about that. A golf tournament or even a gala. And at the end of the day, they clear $5,000 and they spend all, and what they don't factor in is all the human capital, right? That took to do that, to your point, right? I mean, so I always say, is the juice worth the squeeze? And so for $5,000, it'd be much easier to find a couple of donors to write you $1,000 check than to go through all of that to do that. So in those cases, no, it's not. So you have to weigh the time, and that's super important for people that, most organizations were bootstrapped, right? Unless you're a really big, household charity name, then you've got lots of team, or you're a university and they're flush with development people and staff, but that's not the case for most.
Or you have a lot of volunteers who have time to give.
Yeah. And look, we love our volunteers, they're the lifeblood of our organizations for sure. Our board members are volunteers, by
Right.
and large. So really important. But you have to evaluate and prioritize the activities because that's really, really important. Just like I talked about the grant writing, it's low ROI. And so we have to determine, is that the best use of time to be able to grow the revenue and meet the mission.
At this point, I would like to say thank you very much, Carolyn, for all the information that you provided. It was jam-packed with information. For everybody's information, we have been recording the session. And once our business manager in BPW Florida has a chance to work with the video, she will be posting it to the BPW Florida website, which is bpwfl.org. And I forgot to mention that at the beginning of this, I forgot to say that BPW's mission is advocating for equity for all working women through advocacy, information, and connections. And this is one of the ways we have of disseminating information for working women, many of whom are in either working for nonprofits or on nonprofit boards. So I want to thank Carolyn again for sharing her expertise with us and for all of you who joined us this evening. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone. Bye.